What's up, guys? It's your boy Will Messenger, and today I'm coming at you with part 2 of my top 10 movies of 2021 list. The first video was a bunch of honorable mentions, as well as movies 10 through 6 on my list. This is going to be movies 5 through 1 on my list, so it is, in effect, the top 5 movies of 2021. So without further ado, let's get into it. The 5th movie on my list is Nightmare Alley. This is the latest movie from Guillermo del Toro and stars Bradley Cooper as a carnival worker turned mentalist who finds out what happens when you blur the line between fantasy and reality. I've never been the biggest Guillermo del Toro fan, especially his later movies, which have a visual style that feels artificial to me. I first noticed this in The Shape of Water, which just had a visual style that I had mixed feelings about. I'm not technically literate, so I'm just going to refer to Josh Lewis of the Sleazoid podcast and what he calls Del Toro's constantly floating, shallow focus, wide-angle digital slickness. It's honestly kind of fascinating to me, and I'd like to see somebody do a proper video essay on why his movies look the way they do. And that very jarring visual style is in Nightmare Alley, and I did have conflicting feelings about it, just like I did with his other movies. But everything else about this movie is so strong that it's catapulted all the way to number 5 on my list. If anything, the fact that that digital slickness exists and yet this managed to capture the essence of film noir so well makes it all the more impressive and kind of makes it a really interesting movie in that sense. And I think that its main strengths lie in its very engrossing film noir story, as well as some production design that beautifully brings that noir story to life. This can be found in the grit and dirt of the carnival story that occupies the movie's first half, as well as the glossy sheen of Cate Blanchett's doctor's office that I always think about when I think about the movie's caper second half. So while Guillermo del Toro does have a tendency to take these very dark and macabre genres and subject matters and sort of water them down, and he does kind of do that here. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy this movie more than almost anything else that I saw this year, and just think it's a really solid example of modern film noir. At number 4, we have The Power of the Dog, the latest movie from Jane Campion, who is most famously known for directing The Piano. This movie stars Jesse Plemons and Benedict Cumberbatch, who play 2 ranchers who are living in Montana, I think, don't correct me. And one of them marries an innkeeper who is played by Kirsten Dunst, who is also a widow living with her son, played by Cody Smith-McPhee, and familial drama ensues. What I really liked about this movie is that all 4 actors give phenomenal performances, but the way Campion directs the movie, the way the camera functions, has an elevating effect on the emotions of the characters. Whether it's Benedict Cumberbatch's simmering male toxicity or Kirsten Dunst's quiet descent into despair, or Smith-McPhee's sense of alienation at this very masculine world that surrounds him. It just feels like Campion directs every scene with these emotions and power dynamics in mind. This is also the 3rd movie that Johnny Greenwood scored this year. Continues to remain busy. He also did the soundtrack for 2 of the movies that I mentioned in my last video, Spencer and Licorice Pizza. And of those 3 movies, the work that he did on this movie is probably my favorite. It has that kind of weird and mysterious quality that I love from a lot of his other soundtracks, and feels like it does a nice job of propelling the story forward. So I don't have a whole lot else to say about this movie besides the fact that it is beautiful, it's engaging, it's evocative, it's poetic, and it continues to show why Jane Campion is one of the best character-based storytellers in the game. At number 3, we have The Green Knight, a movie that shows that the fantasy genre still has plenty of gas. The plot for this movie is pretty straightforward. It is about Sir Gawain, who is a young man who is a carousing, meandering young man who wants to be a knight. And one day, a mystical creature comes into his uncle, aka King Arthur's medieval court, and says that any knight who can land a blow on him can have his green battle axe, contingent on them allowing him to land a blow on them the following year. So Sir Gawain takes up this offer and then has to confront adulthood in a fantastical medieval world. I really liked the structure of this movie because even though it is about Sir Gawain traveling to the Green Knight so that he can maintain his end of the bargain, there's a lot of detours that he has to take along the way, and it's almost like he's traveling to the end of this long hallway to get to this door, but along the way there are all these other doors on the side, and he keeps peering into them to see what kinds of strange and beguiling wonders lie beyond them. It's just a very fitting structure for a movie that is essentially a metaphor for growing older and confronting adulthood, which is very seldom a straightforward path. Having watched 2 of David Lowery's other movies, The Old Man and the Gun and A Ghost Story, it was very gratifying for me to see him really come into his own, given the right budget and source material. And I'm also just curious to see how straightforward an adaptation this is of the medieval poem that it's based on, because if it is just a straight adaptation, then I'm hoping that he just keeps mining that world and just keeps making Arthurian fantasy movies for the rest of his career, because it really feels like he has mined this world for so much just mystery and beauty, but still only manages to scratch the surface. I could really watch 10 hours of this shit. Thinking about some of the sequences in this, like the one where Gawain meets a ghost who then asks him to help her find the head to her body. It's like you're watching, it's like you've fallen asleep on the couch and wake up to this weird kind of made for TV cartoon movie, and you're not sure if you're dreaming or you've just waken up to some weird shit that you only see in the middle of the night. It's an absolutely beautiful movie that lies at the intersection of art house and genre, which is a bucket that a lot of my favorite movies fall into. It's a very poignant metaphor for, like I said, growing older and confronting adulthood and finding out that being an adult also often feels like being lost and being alone and having to deal with the ugly and the mundane and a bunch of shit that's just not fun. So it presents that message in a really beautiful way, and it's all tied together by a final line that is both simultaneously cheeky and tragic. At number 2, we have Titane. This comes out of France from director Julia Ducournau. This is her follow-up to 2016's critically acclaimed Raw, which I have not seen, but obviously, given how much I enjoyed this movie, I feel very incentivized to watch it. But it is about a woman played by Agatha Roussel who, when she was a child, was involved in an automobile accident that left a titanium plate embedded in the side of her head. She becomes involved in a series of crimes and has to take up with a stranger who's played by Vincent Lindon. So yeah, basically, if you take Cronenberg's Crash, the documentary film The Imposter, and throw them into a blender with a bunch of weird body horror, you've still barely scratched the surface of what this movie is. In my last video, I talked about how much I love movies that essentially invent their own internal logic, and this is definitely one of those movies. It has, I think that its main currency, or one of its main currencies, is ambiguity. Ambiguity of genre, as an example, because is this a body horror movie, a psychological thriller, a family drama? But there's also ambiguity of tone. I mean, in some ways, this movie feels very transgressive and gross, but it also has this very sweet, kind of, very human quality to it. And, sometimes it's one of those things, sometimes it's the other, sometimes it's all of them and none of them at the same time. And a lot of times you run into a movie like this and it's just kind of transgressive and confounding in a way, and challenging in a way that's like just not fun. It's not really enjoyable and you don't really vibe with it. And I think for me, what really made me vibe with this movie is the really strong story and just two incredible performances from Agatha Rousselle and Vincent Lindon. I mean, they both kind of sell this movie with their expressions that they have, and emotions that betray pain, and confusion and love. And it's just like, even if what's happening on screen doesn't make sense in a literal way, it always feels like it makes emotional sense. And makes sense as kind of a movie about relationships. And I just found it to be completely sublime. Also, she f***s a car. At number 1, we have Dune. This is the latest adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic 1965 sci-fi novel. Dune follows the story of... Okay, look, if you don't know the story of Dune, I really can't help you, all right? It's an aristocratic power struggle set in space where almost all of the central action takes place on a desert planet. There's space witches, space Muslims. It's basically just Lawrence of Arabia in space, all right? Don't make me summarize fucking Dune, all right? Denis Villeneuve showed everybody how capable he was of breathing fresh life into an intellectual property with Blade Runner 2049, and here he continues to up the ante. I'll freely admit I might be a little bit biased because I saw this movie in IMAX, and I think this actually might be the first movie that I saw in IMAX. So it was, in that sense, a very special experience for me, but like, this really is, that is how the movie is meant to be viewed. I mean, Villeneuve really understands how to use scope to create a sense of wonder and mystery. And, for that reason alone, this movie was a visual odyssey. There's so many images that are just seared in my mind, from the Bene Gesserit getting off the spaceship on Caladan, to Baron Harkonnen huddled on the ceiling, to the throat incantation scene with the Sardaukar. This movie really is just a visual odyssey alone. And it does the story justice. For a few days after I saw it, I did spend some time sort of mulling over how I really felt about it, and I did have an inkling that maybe it didn't get the pacing quite right. And I think that that's because this movie doesn't follow the classic 3-act structure, because this isn't a full movie. It's the first half of a movie, and Villeneuve still has to stick the landing. So I understand why people have reserved judgment for this movie and have decided to wait until the finished product comes out before they really talk about how they feel about it. But For me personally, I would be lying if I said that I didn't love this movie and wasn't enthralled by every moment of it. I think my favorite thing about this is how much you can tell Villeneuve was making the movie that he wanted to make and making what he would have wanted to see as somebody who grew up as a lifelong fan of the Dune novels. So, like I said, it's a visual and audio odyssey, and for all of those reasons, it is my pick for the best movie of 2021. I didn't really get into plugs in my last video, so I am going to go ahead and just plug a few things. You can follow me on Twitter at Will_Messenger. You can follow me on TikTok at Dealmakers_CEO. I think that's what my handle is. And yeah, those are really the two main social media platforms that I use. I don't really use Instagram. I don't really use Facebook. And you can also listen to a podcast that I had with my friend Ramel, The Dive. So I'll be dropping descriptions for all of those things. And next video, I'm gonna try to do a just roundup of all of the movies that I've seen the last month or two and my thoughts on them. So hopefully that won't take too long, but we'll see how it goes. But anyway, stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching.